Hello everyone, I'm MR.NightCrime and I'm here to help you today. To discuss the world's crime news, and I know you use this video to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching it? Now make yourself comfortable and relax. In the heart of Johannesburg, an armored truck carrying an estimated $50 million worth of diamonds left the headquarters of a renowned jeweler. The route was meticulously planned and security was tight, with armed guards stationed at every possible entry point. Yet, as the vehicle approached an overpass near Sandton, a sudden explosion rocked the street. The road beneath the truck collapsed, plunging the armored vehicle into a pre-dug hole covered with thin concrete. Within moments, masked figures emerged from hidden tunnels below. They swiftly overpowered the stunned guards, cutting through the truck's reinforced doors with industrial-grade tools. The diamonds were loaded onto motorbikes, which disappeared into a web of underground passageways connected to an abandoned mine shaft miles away. By the time law enforcement arrived, the scene was eerily quiet. The only sign of the heist was the smoldering remains of the truck in a deep, empty pit where millions in diamonds had vanished. The operation was precise, executed with military-like efficiency. It was a heist unlike any South Africa had ever seen. Despite extensive investigations, no arrests were made. Surveillance footage captured nothing but darkness in the underground escape routes. The stolen diamonds? They were never recovered. Some say they were smuggled out of the country that very night, while others believe they were recut and sold back into the market, hiding in plain sight. The vanishing diamond heist became one of the most legendary crimes in South African history, an elaborate scheme that proved even the most secure vaults could be breached by those who understood the art of disappearing. The streets of Cape Town's Manenberg district had always been dangerous after dark, but on one particular night, they turned into a battlefield. It started with a single gunshot, sharp, loud, and unmistakable. Then silence. At exactly midnight, a blacked-out van rolled to a stop outside a small, dilapidated house on the corner of a forgotten street. The house belonged to a former gang leader, Jerome Bones Van Wyk, a man who had retired from the life of crime, but still held the secrets of the underworld in his hands. The men who stepped out of the van were not ordinary killers. They wore military-grade vests, carried silenced weapons, and moved with precision. This was not a robbery. It was an execution. Inside the house, Bones sat at his kitchen table, a bottle of brandy half empty before him. He had been expecting them. He had seen the signs, the unfamiliar faces loitering near his house, the strange car that followed him last week, the sudden disappearance of his old associates. He knew the rules of the game. No one truly retired. As the door burst open, the first bullet struck him in the chest, pinning him to his chair. He barely had time to react before a second shot went through his skull. The men moved quickly, checking the house for witnesses. In the back room, they found Bones' younger brother, a man too drunk to realize his life was about to end. The executioners left no survivors. Minutes later, the house was set ablaze. Flames devoured the evidence, but the neighborhood had already heard everything. The gunshots, the screams, the final gasps of breath. By morning, the media was swarming the crime scene. Police officers stood around the charred remains of the house, but they already knew they were too late. The killers had vanished, just as they always did. In Manenberg, these murders were common, and justice was nothing more than a whispered myth. But this time, something was different. Bones had kept a hidden journal, detailing years of drug deals, assassinations, and police corruption. If the wrong person found it, the entire criminal hierarchy of Cape Town could collapse overnight. And someone had found it. Now the real hunt was about to begin. Krugersdorp, a town just west of Johannesburg, had always carried a sinister reputation. With its abandoned mines and forgotten neighborhoods, it was a place where things disappeared, people, evidence, secrets. And on the cold night of July 14th, another soul joined the ranks of the vanished. It began with a phone call. Detective Elias Dlamini had been in the force for 2 decades, witnessing the darkest corners of South African crime. He had seen mutilated bodies dumped in the veldt, drug lords gunned down in their own mansions, and children recruited into gangs before they even learned how to write their own names. But something about this call felt different. The voice on the other end was shaking. "Detective, it's about the missing girls. I know where they are." The call ended abruptly. The number was untraceable. Krugersdorp had been plagued by a string of disappearances. Young women, all between the ages of 16 and 25, vanishing without a trace. Their families had begged for answers, but the cases grew cold. Rumors spread. Some believed a serial killer was at work. Others whispered of something worse, an underground network selling flesh to the highest bidder. Blamini had followed every lead, every dead-end tip, every witness too scared to talk. But now someone wanted to be heard. By midnight, he found himself parked outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The air was thick with dust, the kind that settles on forgotten places. His hand hovered near his holster as he pushed open the rusted door. The darkness inside swallowed him whole. Then he heard it, a faint shuffling sound. "Hello!" A shadow moved in the far corner. As his eyes adjusted, he saw her, a girl, no older than 19, her clothes tattered, her face sunken with hunger and fear. "My name is Thandie," she whispered. "They were going to take me next." Blamini knelt beside her, his heart pounding. "Who?" She hesitated. "The ones who took the others." Before she could say another word, the warehouse lights exploded into life. A sudden, blinding white that left him momentarily stunned. Then gunfire. Blamini barely had time to react before bullets tore through the air. He pulled Thandie to the ground, shielding her as the metal walls shook from the impact. He fired back blindly, the echoes of gunshots bouncing off the emptiness. Footsteps. Multiple. Closing in. He grabbed Thandie's wrist. "Run!" They bolted toward the exit, bullets kicking up dust behind them. Blamini's car was just meters away, but the figures were gaining. He fired over his shoulder, striking one of them, a masked man, collapsing into the dirt. Then silence. He shoved Thandie into the car, peeling away before another shot could be fired. The girl was shaking beside him, clutching her torn sleeves. "They know," she whispered. "They'll come for me." Blamini kept his eyes on the road. Let them try. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he reviewed the evidence, what little he had. Krugersdorp had always been haunted by darkness, but this wasn't just another case of missing girls. This was something deeper, organized, ruthless, and the killers knew he was getting close. The Karus stretched endlessly under the scorching African sun, a vast, unforgiving desert where the horizon seemed to melt into the sky. The kind of place where secrets could be buried forever. For decades, this isolated expanse had been a silent witness to smuggling, drug trafficking, and organized crime. But on a hot November afternoon, it bore witness to something even darker. A private jet, registered under a shell company in Dubai, landed on a dusty airstrip outside a forgotten town. The plane carried no official passengers, but those who stepped off were men of power. Figures whose names never made it to newspapers, whose wealth was built on blood and corruption. They were there for a deal. In a decrepit farmhouse miles from civilization, 10 men sat at a long wooden table. A single lantern swayed from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows over the cracked walls. The men were from different corners of the underworld, arms dealers, cartel representatives, ex-military operatives. The only thing they had in common was the hunger for power. At the head of the table sat David Kruger, a former intelligence officer turned mercenary, now one of the most feared brokers in South Africa. Across from him was a Nigerian businessman, Kalu Oba, known for his silent control over one of the largest trafficking syndicates in West Africa. Between them sat 2 steel briefcases, one filled with cash, the other with something far more valuable, documents, classified intelligence, and a ledger filled with names of corrupt officials across the continent. Information that could shift power overnight. The deal was simple. Kruger wanted weapons. Oba wanted control, but neither of them realized that someone else was watching. From a ridge a mile away, a lone figure adjusted his rifle. His name was Willem Voss, a former Special Forces sniper turned government asset. For the past 3 months, he had been tracking Kruger, watching the ex-spy weave a web of arms deals, assassinations, and black market operations. Tonight was supposed to be the takedown. He steadied his scope, placing Kruger's head in the crosshairs. His orders were clear: eliminate the target and retrieve the ledger. But just as he prepared to pull the trigger, something shifted in the shadows. A third party, uninvited. Without warning, gunfire erupted from the darkness. A dozen masked gunmen stormed the farmhouse, opening fire before anyone could react. The lantern shattered, plunging the room into chaos. Bodies fell, blood spraying across the wooden floor. The deal had been compromised. Voss cursed under his breath. He didn't know who the attackers were, but they weren't government agents. This was something else. A power play. Someone wanted to wipe the slate clean. Kruger dubbed behind the table, returning fire. His men fell one by one, but he didn't panic. He was used to war. Across from him, Oba was dead, his skull split open by a single round. His syndicate, his influence, wiped away in an instant. Voss had a choice, take the shot or retreat. He chose neither. Instead, he used the confusion to descend the ridge, moving through the night like a ghost. He reached the farmhouse as the last shots faded. Inside, Kruger was still alive, but barely. The attackers were gone, but they had taken something, the ledger. Voss knelt beside him. Who were they? Kruger coughed, blood trickling from his lips. Bigger than you think. His breathing slowed. I can still save you, Voss said, but Kruger managed a weak smile. I don't need saving. With that, he was gone. Voss searched the bodies. The attackers had left no evidence, no insignias, no identifiers. Just silence. As he walked back into the Karoo's endless night, one thing was clear. The war for power in Africa's underworld had just begun. And he was caught in the middle of it. Johannesburg pulsed with life, a city that never truly slept. Skyscrapers loomed over shanty settlements, businessmen shared streets with beggars, and wealth and crime danced in an unbreakable cycle. But beneath the neon lights and luxury cars, a hidden empire operated in the shadows, the Devil's Syndicate. The name was whispered in fear, a criminal network so powerful that even law enforcement avoided speaking of it. Its tendrils stretched across Africa, trafficking drugs, weapons, and human lives. At its core was a man known only as the Minister, a faceless figure who controlled politicians, judges, and entire police units. Few had ever met him. Even fewer had lived to tell the tale. The warehouse on Aloft Street. Detective Cabello Makona had spent the last 8 years chasing the syndicate, piecing together fragments of its empire. Every time he got close, witnesses vanished, cases fell apart, and his own department warned him to back off. But this time he had a lead. A low-level courier, arrested in a botched robbery, had slipped up during interrogation. Between panicked breaths, he had muttered 2 words, Aloft Street. Makona knew the location, a rusted warehouse in the industrial district. It was officially abandoned, but sources claimed it was a hub for smuggling operations. At midnight, he sat in his car, watching the building from a distance. The street was quiet, too quiet. He checked his pistol, then stepped out. Inside, the warehouse smelled of oil and decay. Wooden crates were stacked high, marked with foreign symbols. He moved silently, his footsteps drowned out by the distant hum of the city. Then a sound, a muffled cry. He followed it to a locked storage room. A woman's voice, weak, pleading. Makona didn't hesitate. He raised his gun and fired at the lock. The door swung open. Inside, he found her. A girl, no older than 18, her hands bound, her face bruised. She flinched at the sight of him, her eyes wild with terror. It's okay, he whispered. I'm here to help. She tried to speak, but her lips trembled. Finally, she forced out a single name. The Minister. A trap set in blood. Makona barely had time to react before the room was flooded with light. The warehouse doors burst open. A dozen men entered, armed to the teeth. The girl screamed. He grabbed her, dragging her behind cover as bullets tore through the wooden crates. Splinters exploded around them. He fired back, dropping 2 of the gunmen, but they kept coming. Whoever these men were, they weren't ordinary criminals. Their movements were disciplined, precise. Mercenaries. Makona's mind raced. If they were here, that meant the syndicate knew. This wasn't a random bust. This was a setup. He had walked straight into a death trap. One of the gunmen tossed a grenade. Makona barely had time to react. He threw himself over the girl as the explosion ripped through the room. The force sent them both crashing against the wall. His vision blurred. Through the smoke, he saw a man approaching, tall, dressed in a crisp black suit. Unlike the others, he carried no weapon. He didn't need one. Makona had seen him before on surveillance tapes, in whispers among informants. Jonas Lebelo, the minister's right-hand man. Lebelo crouched beside him, inspecting him like a wounded animal. You should have stayed away, detective. His voice was calm, almost amused. Makona tried to move, but Lebelo pressed a boot against his chest. You think this is about crime? About gangs? No, my friend. This is about power. He gestured toward the girl. Do you even know who she is? Makona coughed, tasting blood. He shook his head. Lebelo smirked. She's the daughter of a man who betrayed us. Makona's stomach twisted. This wasn't just human trafficking. This was political. The syndicate wasn't just selling girls. They were using them, punishing families, controlling leaders. And now they had him. Lebelo sighed. You're persistent, I'll give you that. But this is where it ends. He raised a silencer. Makona closed his eyes. A gunshot rang out. Not from Lebeloh's pistol. From outside. Then another. And another. Shouting. Screams. More gunfire. The building was under attack. The wolf enters the den. The gunmen turned, confusion flickering across their faces. Makona used the distraction to roll aside, grabbing his weapon. From the shadows, a lone figure emerged, moving like death itself. A suppressed rifle barked, dropping mercenaries one by one. Precision shots. Head, chest, throat. Makona recognized the style instantly. Military. Then he saw the man's face. Willem Voss. The ghost. The government asset. The man who never missed a target. Lebeloh's smirk vanished. Voss. Voss didn't answer. He fired. Lebeloh dodged, diving for cover. His remaining men scattered, retreating into the darkness. Makona grabbed the girl and ran toward Voss. You working for us now? Voss didn't look at him. I work for no one. Outside, a black SUV screeched to a stop. Voss shoved Makona and the girl inside. As they sped away, the warehouse behind them erupted into flames. Makona turned to Voss. Why did you save us? Voss stared at the burning building. Because I need answers. And the minister just made it personal. The war begins. That night, Johannesburg burned. The attack on the warehouse sent shockwaves through the underworld. The syndicate had been untouchable for years, but now someone was coming for them. In a private estate overlooking the city, Jonas Lebeloh stood by a window, watching the flames. Behind him a voice spoke. Low, calm, commanding. Who did this? Lebeloh turned slowly. The room was dim, but he didn't need to see the man's face. He knew. The minister. Lebeloh swallowed hard. Willem Voss. A pause. Then a chuckle. This changes nothing, the minister said. If he wants war. He turned, his face finally illuminated by the city lights. We'll give him one. Johannesburg was bleeding. In less than 48 hours, 3 drug dens had been torched, renowned syndicate lieutenants found dead, and an illegal gold refinery in Soweto mysteriously exploded. No one claimed responsibility, but everyone knew who was behind it. Willem Voss. The ex-Special Forces sniper had declared war on the Devil's Syndicate, and the minister wasn't going to let it go unanswered. The trap is set. Voss had spent the last decade in the shadows, working as a ghost for governments who needed dirty work done without getting their hands bloody. He had dismantled cartels in the Congo, assassinated warlords in Somalia, and taken down corrupt generals in Sudan. But this was different. This was personal. He sat in a safe house in Hillbrow, a stolen police radio on the table, an AR-15 across his lap. Beside him, Detective Cabello Makona nursed a whiskey, his bruised face lit by the glow of the city. Across the room, the girl they had rescued, her name was Anil Kimalo, slept restlessly on the couch. She was the daughter of a politician, a man who had once been loyal to the syndicate, but had tried to break free. His punishment? A bullet to the head. His daughter was supposed to be a message. Voss had changed that. Now she was their only link to the minister. She's still in shock, Makona muttered. She barely speaks. Voss didn't look up. She doesn't need to. The minister will come for her. And Voss would be waiting. At exactly 2:45 a.m., the police radio crackled to life. Armed men spotted near Commissioner Street. Unmarked SUVs. No plates. Makona straightened. They're looking for us. Voss smirked. Good. The hotel massacre. The plan was simple. Set the bait, watch them come. Voss and Makona moved Anil to an abandoned luxury hotel in Sandton, a high-rise that had been left unfinished when the investors mysteriously vanished. Rumors said the minister had something to do with it. The syndicate would think they were hiding there. Voss positioned himself on the 15th floor with his sniper rifle. Makona took the 10th. The girl was never actually in the building. She was already safe in a hidden location. All they had to do now was wait. At 3:27 a.m., the first SUV rolled up, then another, then a third. Black, tinted windows, no markings. The syndicate had arrived. Voss peered through his scope. Jonas Lebeloh stepped out of the lead vehicle, flanked by 6 mercenaries in body armor. Another 10 men poured out of the other cars, heavily armed. This wasn't a rescue. This was an execution. Voss exhaled. Then he pulled the trigger. The first shot took out the driver of the second SUV. The bullet entered through the windshield, painting the interior red. Panic erupted. The mercenaries scrambled, some returning fire blindly toward the hotel. Voss remained still. He adjusted his aim. Second shot. A gunman's head snapped back, his body crumpling onto the pavement. McCona took his cue, firing from the lower floors. His first shot struck a syndicate soldier in the knee. His second hit the man's throat. The syndicate retaliated. Gunfire tore through the building, shattering windows, punching holes in the walls. The once grand hotel was now a war zone. Lebelo barked orders. 2 mercenaries rushed into the building, their boots echoing in the empty halls. Voss switched weapons, grabbing his suppressed pistol. He moved like a shadow, navigating the ruined corridors. He caught the first mercenary as he reached the stairwell. A single shot to the temple. The second never saw him coming. Voss grabbed him from behind, snapping his neck with a practiced twist. Down below, McCona was pinned by gunfire. Voss had to move fast, face to face with the minister. Lebelo realized the ambush had gone wrong. His men were dropping like flies. They needed to retreat. He reached for his radio. "Get us out of here." A bullet shattered the radio in his hand. He turned. Voss was standing on the rooftop across the street, sniper rifle aimed directly at him. For the first time, fear flickered in Lebelo's eyes. Voss smirked. "Tell your boss I'm coming." Before Lebelo could move, Voss fired, not at him, but at the SUV's fuel tank. The explosion tore through the street, flipping one of the cars. Fire and smoke filled the night sky. By the time the syndicate regrouped, Voss and McCona were gone. But the message had been sent. The minister's fury. The next morning, in a heavily guarded mansion outside Pretoria, the minister sat in silence. The war had begun, and it wasn't going in his favor. Lebelo stood before him, bandaged and furious. "We need to kill him. Tonight." The minister simply sipped his tea. "No." Lebelo blinked. "No." The minister set his cup down. "Willem Voss is not an enemy you hunt blindly. We let him believe he's winning. We let him make mistakes." He leaned back, smiling for the first time. "And when the time is right, we make him disappear." Johannesburg's darkest hours. The city was no longer safe. The streets ran with blood as the minister and Voss played their deadly game. Corrupt officials, undercover agents, and rival gangs all chose sides. The newspapers called it a gang war. The police called it an internal dispute. But those who truly understood the underworld knew what it really was. A reckoning. And the bodies were just beginning to pile up. Johannesburg was suffocating under the weight of an invisible war. Businesses burned overnight. Informants turned up dead in alleyways, their tongues cut out. Police stations received calls they refused to trace, warnings wrapped in threats. The devil's syndicate was bleeding, but it was not yet broken. And the minister was about to remind everyone who ruled the underworld. The hunter becomes the hunted. Willem Voss had spent years perfecting the art of the hunt, tracking war criminals in the Congo, eliminating rogue generals in Sudan, toppling drug lords in Nigeria. He had studied the shadows, lived in them, thrived in them. But now the hunter was being hunted. Voss sat in a safe house in Soweto, a dimly lit apartment with reinforced walls and a stolen police scanner. Detective Cabello McCona leaned against the table, nursing a cigarette and a bruised shoulder. Across from them, Anil Kumalo was curled up in an armchair, staring blankly at the wall. She hadn't spoken much since the ambush at the hotel. "She needs medical help," McCona muttered. Voss didn't look up. He was cleaning his pistol, every movement slow, methodical. "She needs to disappear." McCona exhaled smoke. "She won't survive alone." "She won't have to," Voss said. "I know a place." McCona raised an eyebrow. "Where?" Voss glanced up, his expression unreadable. "The township of Alexandra. A man named King Tamba." McCona's cigarette froze halfway to his lips. "King Tamba? You serious?" Voss didn't answer. He just stood, sliding his pistol into its holster. McCona sighed, rubbing his temple. "Damn it. Fine. Let's go see the king." King Tamba's kingdom. In the maze of Alexandra's backstreets, there were only 2 laws, fear and respect. And King Tamba commanded both. He wasn't a politician, a businessman, or a gangster. He was something far worse, a king without a throne, but with an army. His kingdom was a network of syndicates, street gangs, and ex-military ghosts who had nowhere else to go. He had informants in police stations, spies in parliament, and assassins in every province. If you wanted someone to disappear, you went to the minister. But if you wanted a war, you went to King Tamba. Voss and McCona arrived at a nightclub hidden in the heart of Alexandra. The music was deafening, the air thick with sweat, smoke, and whispered deals. Armed men in tailored suits stood at every corner, watching with dead eyes. They knew who Voss was, and they weren't sure if they wanted him there. Makona leaned in. "This is a terrible idea." Voss ignored him and walked straight to the VIP section. A door swung open, revealing King Tamba, a towering man with a shaved head, dark skin gleaming under the club lights, dressed in a designer suit that cost more than most people's homes. He didn't smile. "Voss." His deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "I heard you were back." Voss nodded. "I need your help." Tamba raised an eyebrow. "My help? That's a new one." Voss gestured to Anil, who stood behind him, half hidden. "She's not safe. The minister wants her dead." Tamba's expression darkened. "I know." Voss stiffened. "How?" Tamba leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Because the minister already offered me a contract to kill you." Makona tensed, reaching for his gun. But Tamba laughed. "Relax, detective. I said no. The minister thinks he owns Johannesburg. He forgets I was here first." Voss met his gaze. "Then help me." Tamba exhaled, studying Anil for a long moment. Then he turned to one of his men. "Get her out of the city. Mozambique border. Safe house." The man nodded and led Anil away. Makona looked surprised. "Just like that?" Tamba smirked. "I don't kill children." His smile faded. "But that doesn't mean I'll go to war for you, Voss. I choose my battles." Voss leaned in. "Then let me make this your battle." Tamba's eyes narrowed. "I'm listening." Voss pulled a USB drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. Financial records, offshore accounts, drug shipments, bribes, everything the minister doesn't want the world to see. Tamba picked up the drive, turning it between his fingers. "And where did you get this?" Voss didn't blink. "Let's just say, I have friends in high places." Tamba chuckled. "I don't believe in friends." Voss smirked. "Then believe in leverage." Tamba stared at him for a long moment. Then he grinned. "All right, Ghost. You've got my attention." He leaned back. "Tell me, how do we kill a king?" The ministers moved. Across the city, in a heavily guarded compound, the minister sat in silence. A television played in the background, showing news reports of burning businesses, gang killings, and missing officials. Lebelo stood at his side, his face still bruised from the failed ambush. "Voss is making allies," he growled. "We should strike first." The minister didn't look away from the screen. "No," Lebelo frowned. "But," the minister held up a hand. Silence. Then he spoke, his voice smooth as silk. "Voss is not a man you chase, Jonas. He is a man you invite." He turned, his cold eyes locking onto Lebelo. "Set up a meeting. Tell Voss we want to negotiate." Lebelo hesitated. "And if he refuses?" The minister smiled. "Then we remind him why the Devil's Syndicate runs this city." Lebelo grinned. "And how do we do that?" The minister picked up a knife from his desk, running his fingers along the blade. "By making an example. Johannesburg's bloodiest night. At 2 a.m., the streets of Hillbrow erupted in chaos. Explosions rocked 3 police precincts. A dozen officers were slaughtered in their own stations. 5 known informants were found hanging from freeway overpasses, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. And then came the final blow. A phone call to Voss. A familiar voice. Tamba's voice. Bruised. Weak. Afraid. "Voss, it's a trap." A ragged cough. "The minister, he's coming for you." Then a gunshot. The line went dead. Voss stared at the phone, his jaw tightening. Makona cursed under his breath. "Damn it, they got to him." Voss exhaled slowly. "No." He looked out at the city, his voice ice cold. "They just declared war." The city was breaking. Hillbrow burned under a black sky, the scent of charred bodies and gunpowder thick in the air. Johannesburg had seen violence before, but never like this. Never this fast. In less than 24 hours, 3 police precincts were reduced to rubble. Informants were executed in broad daylight, and businesses loyal to King Tamba were set ablaze. This was no longer a game of survival. This was war. A ghost on the move. Willem Voss stood at the edge of a rooftop, the wind howling through the shattered windows of the abandoned building. Below him, the city churned with sirens and screaming. His phone was still in his hand. The last words of King Tamba echoed in his mind. "Voss, it's a trap." Then the gunshot. Voss clenched his jaw. Tamba had been the closest thing to an ally in this war, and the minister had made an example of him. Makona stood behind him, gripping his gun like it was the only thing holding him together. "We need to move." If they got to Tamba, we're next. Voss didn't answer. His mind was already elsewhere, calculating, hunting. They won't stop, Makona continued. The minister won't stop until you're dead. Voss turned. His eyes were sharp, cold. Then we kill him first. Makona exhaled. You make it sound easy. Voss checked his rifle, securing a fresh magazine. It is. Makona shook his head. You don't get it. The minister isn't just a man. He's a system. You take him down, and another one takes his place. You need more than bullets to kill a ghost like him. Voss looked at the detective, his voice deadly calm. Then I'll burn the whole system down. The fall of a king. Voss needed proof. Tamba's body was missing. The minister didn't just kill people, he erased them. If Voss was going to avenge him, he needed to know what happened. And there was only one place that held the answers. The pit, a secret syndicate prison, buried beneath an abandoned factory on the outskirts of Soweto. The police didn't know it existed. Hell, most criminals didn't know it existed. But Voss did, because years ago he had put people there. Now he was breaking in. A storm at the pit. Midnight. The factory was silent. Voss moved like a shadow, slipping through the rusted gates, his silencer attached. 2 guards stood at the entrance, smoking, laughing about something. 2 shots. The laughter died. Voss dragged their bodies into the darkness, slipping inside. The underground levels were worse than he remembered. Rusted cages, bloodstains on the floor, the stench of death lingering in the air. A single guard sat at a desk, flipping through a phone. Voss didn't give him a chance to react. He pressed his knife against the man's throat, his voice a whisper. Tamba. The man trembled. W what? Voss pressed harder. Where is he? The guard gulped. He's not here. Voss narrowed his eyes. Liar. A sharp slice. The man gasped, blood trickling down his neck. Voss repeated the question. This time the guard answered. They took him to the mines. Voss froze. Makona, who had just entered, frowned. The mines? Voss nodded grimly. The minister's real empire. Makona's face paled. You mean? Voss turned to the guard. Where? The man coughed, blood spilling from his lips. Deep in the northern cape. Then his eyes rolled back. He was dead. Voss sighed, standing. We leave now. Makona frowned. You're serious? Just like that. Voss glanced at him. We don't have time to waste. The minister's empire, the mines, the northern cape, an endless stretch of desert and dust. But beneath the sand, there was gold. And beneath the gold, there were graves. The Devil's Syndicate didn't just traffic drugs. They controlled illegal mining operations, a labyrinth of tunnels and forgotten shafts where workers labored until they dropped. Some of them were runaways, some were traffic slaves, but all of them were dead men walking. And somewhere in that darkness, King Tamba was either dying or already dead. Voss drove in silence. The old Land Cruiser rumbled over the cracked road, the headlights cutting through the endless blackness. Makona checked his pistol. So, what's the plan? Voss kept his eyes on the road. We go in quiet. Makona snorted. Yeah, because that always works out. Voss smirked. Fine. Then we go in loud. Makona sighed. That's more like it. The desert stretched endlessly, the horizon swallowed by the night. And somewhere ahead, the minister was waiting, held beneath the sand. The mines were worse than Voss had imagined. A fortress of dirt and iron, surrounded by armed guards and floodlights. Men in chains dug through the earth, their backs raw from lashes. Syndicate enforcers watched over them, laughing, drinking, betting on which worker would collapse next. Voss clenched his jaw. Makona whistled. This is worse than I thought. Voss nodded. We burn it down. Makona raised an eyebrow. Just like that. Voss loaded his rifle. Just like that. A king's last stand. They moved fast. Voss took out the first watchtower, silencing the guard with a clean shot. Makona rigged the fuel reserves with explosives. The workers watched, silent, afraid. Then the alarms blared. Gunfire erupted. The desert exploded in chaos as the syndicate fought back, bullets ripping through the air. Voss moved through the battlefield like a ghost, dropping enemies with every shot. Makona covered his flank, cursing between bursts of gunfire. Then a scream. Voss turned, his heart hammering. King Tamba, half-conscious, bloodied, chained to a wooden post. Syndicate soldiers surrounded him, laughing. And standing at the center of it all, Jonas Lebelo, the minister's right hand. He held a knife, pressing it against Tamba's throat. Drop your gun, Voss. Voss didn't move. Lebelo grinned. You can't win this. You. A gunshot. Lebelow's smile vanished. He staggered back, clutching his stomach. His men hesitated. That was their mistake. Voss moved like lightning, dropping 3 of them before they could react. Makona finished the rest. Silence fell over the mines. Voss rushed to Tamba, cutting his chains. The man collapsed into his arms, coughing blood. Tamba looked up, grinning weakly. Took you long enough. Voss smirked. Shut up. Then boom. The fuel tanks exploded. Fire roared through the mines, swallowing everything. Makona shouted, "We gotta go." Voss lifted Tamba onto his shoulders. "We're leaving." And as the mines collapsed behind them, the desert sky lit up with flames. The minister's empire was burning, but the war was far from over. The fire had swallowed the mines. Thick black smoke rose into the night sky, turning the desert into a graveyard of flames. The bodies of syndicate soldiers lay scattered among the wreckage, their empire reduced to nothing but ash. But the war was far from over. Voss knew that, and so did the minister. The road to nowhere. The land cruiser roared across the cracked desert road, kicking up dust and debris. The air inside was thick with sweat and gunpowder. King Tamba groaned in the back seat, his wounds bleeding through his shirt. He was barely conscious, his body limp from exhaustion. Makona glanced at Voss. "He's not going to make it if we don't find a doctor." Voss didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the road, his grip tight on the wheel. Makona sighed. "Voss." Voss exhaled sharply. "I know." Tamba coughed, his voice weak. I know a place." Voss glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Where?" Tamba swallowed. "Limpopo, old friend." Makona frowned. "Limpopo? That's nearly 600 kilometers from here." Voss didn't hesitate. "We drive." Makona muttered a curse but didn't argue. There was no time. Not with the minister coming. The shadow that hunts. Johannesburg. The minister sat in his dimly lit office, the glow of the city skyline casting shadows across his face. A large man stood before him, his expression stone cold. Jonas Lebelow's brother. The minister exhaled smoke from his cigar. "Your brother is dead." The man said nothing. The minister leaned forward. "Who killed him?" A phone was placed on the desk. A grainy security feed played. Voss. Moving through the mines like a ghost, cutting men down one by one. The minister smiled. "A ghost." He tapped the cigar against the ashtray. "Find him." The man nodded. "And when I do?" The minister's smile widened. "Burn everything he loves." A town without a name. 14 hours on the road. Voss barely blinked. The road stretched endlessly, heat waves rising from the tarmac. The only sounds were the occasional cough from Tamba and the hum of the tires on asphalt. Makona sighed, rubbing his face. "I need coffee." Voss remained silent. Makona groaned. "Come on, man. I'm dying here." Voss finally spoke. "You're not the one bleeding out." Makona glanced at Tamba, then back at Voss. "Fair point." A sign appeared ahead. "Welcome to Masodi, population 3,200. Makona frowned. "This the place?" Tamba coughed. "Go left." Voss followed the dirt road. The town was small, barely more than a few houses and a single gas station. Tamba's voice was weaker now. "His name is Dr. Langerman." Voss and Makona exchanged glances. A white man running a clinic this deep in Limpopo? Something didn't add up. Dr. Langerman's clinic. The clinic was old. Rusted metal roof, cracked walls, a faded sign that simply read medical assistance. Voss parked the car. Makona helped Tamba out of the back seat, carrying him towards the door. Voss knocked once. Silence. Then, the barrel of a shotgun pressed against his forehead. A deep voice. "Who sent you?" Voss didn't flinch. "We need help." A moment of hesitation. Then the shotgun lowered. The door creaked open. An old man stood there, wrinkled, gray-haired, his blue eyes sharp as knives. A pistol was tucked into his belt, his shirt still stained with blood from a previous patient. Dr. Langerman. He took one look at Tamba and sighed. "Bring him inside." The doctors passed. The clinic smelled of alcohol and death. Langerman worked fast, stitching Tamba's wounds with expert hands. The room was dimly lit, the only sound the hum of an old fan in the corner. Makona crossed his arms. "You used to be military, didn't you?" Langerman didn't look up. "A long time ago." Voss watched the doctor's hands, steady despite his age. "Why are you here?" Langerman smirked. "Why are you here?" Voss didn't answer. Langerman finished the last stitch, wiping the blood from his gloves. "He'll live." the doctor said, standing. But he needs rest. Tamba groaned. No time. Langerman placed a hand on his chest. You'll take time or you'll die. Voss turned to the doctor. How long? Langerman sighed. A few days, at least. Voss nodded. They didn't have a few days, but they had no choice. The wolves arrived. Midnight. Voss sat by the window watching the road. His rifle rested in his lap, his grip tight. Makona snored on the couch. Langerman sat across the room, drinking from a steel flask. Then a distant sound. Engines. Voss tensed. Langerman heard it too. He exhaled, standing slowly. They found you. Voss grabbed his rifle. How many ways out of here? Langerman pointed to the back door. That leads to the river. But if they have snipers? Glass shattered. Gunfire tore through the clinic. Makona jolted awake. What the? Voss shoved him down. Stay low. The walls exploded with bullets, dust and debris raining down. Makona cursed. They brought a whole army. Voss peeked outside. 2 trucks. 8 men. One of them stood out. Jonas Lebelow's brother. Voss's grip tightened. Langerman cocked his shotgun. I hope you boys know how to fight. Voss smirked. We don't run. A war in the night. The first grenade shattered the front wall. Voss and Makona rolled into cover, returning fire. Langerman took out the first attacker, his shotgun blast sending the man flying. Outside, Lebelow's brother barked orders. Bring me Voss's head. Voss cursed. They want me alive. Makona grinned. Then let's disappoint them. The battle was fast. Brutal. Voss moved through the clinic like a ghost, dropping men with precise shots. Langerman fired from the doorway, his old military instincts sharp as ever. Makona fought like a man possessed, his pistol flashing in the dark. Then a scream. Langerman fell. Blood pooled around his stomach. Voss turned, too late. A rifle but slammed into his skull. Darkness swallowed him. Captured. When Voss opened his eyes, he was in chains. The room was cold. Empty. The scent of blood filled the air. A figure stepped into the light. Jonas Lebelow's brother. He smiled. Good morning, Willem Voss. Then he raised his knife. Let's have a little chat. Voss sat in the chair, wrists shackled to the steel frame. His head throbbed from the blow, his vision still blurred. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the metallic stench of blood. A single bulb swung overhead, casting shifting shadows across the concrete walls. Across from him, Jonas Lebelow's brother paced slowly, the knife in his hand glinting under the flickering light. You've made quite a mess, he said, voice low and even. The mines, our men, even Jonas. He stopped, staring at Voss with dark, hollow eyes. My brother was a fool, but he was still my blood. Voss didn't respond. His head tilted slightly, assessing his surroundings. 2 armed guards stood by the door, AK-47s resting against their chests. A third leaned against the far wall, chewing on a toothpick. Lebelow's brother crouched in front of him, the knife pressing gently against Voss's cheek. You should be dead, he whispered, but the minister wants to see you. Voss finally met his gaze. I'm honored. Lebelow's brother chuckled, shaking his head. You will be. Then he stood, gesturing to the guards. Get him ready. The journey to Pretoria. The black SUV roared down the highway, its tinted windows shielding Voss from the morning sun. His wrists were still shackled, his body aching from the fight at the clinic. Langerman was dead. Makona had managed to escape with Tamba, but Voss had no idea if they were still alive. And now, he was being delivered straight into the minister's hands. Lebelow's brother sat beside him, staring out the window, fingers tapping against his knee. Do you know why you're still breathing? He asked. Voss said nothing. Because the minister sees something in you. He thinks you can be useful. Voss smirked. Is that so? Lebelow's brother nodded. He likes men who know how to burn things. Voss leaned back. Then he'll love me. Lebelow's brother chuckled. We'll see. The SUV sped through the outskirts of Pretoria, moving past abandoned warehouses and burned-out vehicles. The city had changed in recent years, shifting further into the shadows of crime and corruption. They passed a checkpoint, armed men in black tactical gear nodding as the car rolled through. The compound ahead was massive. High walls, guard towers, the minister's fortress. Voss exhaled. It was time. The minister's throne. The room was unlike anything Voss had expected. It wasn't cold, dark, or threatening. It was luxurious. Golden chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light across the marble floors. Exotic paintings adorned the walls, and soft jazz played from a nearby record player. The minister sat in a leather armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand. He was an older man, sharp-dressed, with graying hair and intelligent eyes. He smiled as Voss was brought in. "Ah, Willem Voss." Voss said nothing. The minister gestured toward a seat across from him. "Please, sit." The guards forced Voss down into the chair. The minister sighed. "That won't be necessary." Lebelow's brother hesitated, then stepped back. Voss rolled his shoulders, the weight of the shackles pressing against his wrists. "So, you finally caught me." The minister chuckled, taking a slow sip of whiskey. "Caught you? No, my dear boy. I saved you." Voss raised an eyebrow. The minister leaned forward. "If I wanted you dead, I would have let my men gut you in that clinic." Voss smirked. "I guess I owe you a thank you card." The minister smiled. "I prefer loyalty over gratitude." Voss tilted his head. "Loyalty?" The minister nodded. "You've dismantled the syndicate, piece by piece. My enemies. You burned their empire to the ground." He swirled his whiskey glass. "That kind of talent is rare." Voss exhaled slowly. "So, what do you want?" The minister's smile widened. "I want you to work for me. A devil's bargain." Voss laughed. It was sharp, bitter. "You must be joking." The minister chuckled. "I don't joke." Voss leaned forward, resting his shackled hands on the table. "You hunted me for years, killed my men, made my life hell." The minister nodded. "And yet, here we are." Voss clenched his jaw. "What makes you think I'd ever work for you?" The minister's eyes darkened. "Because if you don't, I will make everyone you care about disappear." Voss's muscles tensed. "Tomba, Makona, your old crew." The minister leaned in, voice soft. "I will erase them." Voss inhaled sharply, his mind racing. The minister smiled. "But if you agree, well, I can offer you everything." Voss's lips pressed into a thin line. The minister's voice was velvet smooth. "Power, money, immunity. You will never have to run again." Voss's heart pounded. The minister leaned back, swirling his whiskey. "I don't need an answer right now," he said. "But choose wisely." He gestured to the guards. "Take him to his room. Let him think." Voss was pulled to his feet, his mind spinning. The minister watched him go, a knowing smile on his lips. A room with no exit. The door locked behind him with a heavy clank. Voss stood in the dimly lit room, staring at the walls. No windows, no weapons, just a single bed, a table, and a glass of water. He ran a hand through his hair. The minister had given him a choice. But was it really a choice at all? If he refused, his people would die. If he agreed, he would become a pawn in the minister's empire. His fingers curled into a fist. There had to be a way out. A way to win. Voss exhaled, his mind sharpening. He had one shot at this. One chance to play the minister at his own game. His lips curled into a smirk. It was time to outthink the devil. Voss sat on the edge of the bed, his mind working through every possible outcome. The room was silent, except for the low hum of an air vent hidden in the ceiling. The minister had given him time to think, but Voss knew that time was an illusion. He had to act, and he had to act now. He stood up, walking to the door. Solid steel. No handle on the inside. He ran his fingers along the frame, no weaknesses. He turned his attention to the vent. Too small to crawl through, but big enough for sound to travel. Voss smirked. The minister had underestimated him. And that was a mistake. Observing the enemy. The first step to escape wasn't force, it was understanding. Voss spent the next 12 hours doing nothing but watching and listening. Every time a guard came to bring him food or check on him, he took note of their movements. Their uniforms. Their sidearms. He noticed the way they carried themselves, professional, but not military. Mercenaries. That meant loyalty could be bought. Voss also discovered something else. The air vent carried sound from other rooms. Late at night, he heard voices. Conversations happening elsewhere in the compound. He sat perfectly still, eyes closed, focusing. Minister wants an answer soon. He's dangerous. We should kill him. Not our call. But if he refuses, we make it look like an accident. Voss's jaw tightened. So that was the game. He had one chance to turn this in his favor. And he knew exactly where to start. The weak link. The next morning, when the guard arrived with his food, Voss was ready. It was the younger one, shorter than the others, lighter build. His uniform was too clean, his grip on his rifle too rigid. A rookie. Voss grinned. The guard placed the food on the table and turned to leave. Voss spoke. "First time working for the minister?" The guard hesitated. Voss chuckled. "Thought so. The guard clenched his jaw. "Shut up and eat." Voss leaned back. "I get it. You signed up for easy money. Thought this would be some cushy gig. Guard a few prisoners. Stand around looking tough." He smirked. "But then you met him." The guard's hands twitched. Voss pressed forward. "The minister isn't a man. He's a monster. And monsters don't care about loyalty." Silence. Then Voss went in for the kill. "How long do you think you'll last before he decides you're expendable?" The guard exhaled sharply. Voss knew he had planted the seed. Now he just had to wait. The minister's demand. The following evening, the guards escorted Voss back to the minister's office. The room was just as elegant as before. The minister sat behind his massive oak desk, a cigar resting between his fingers. He smiled as Voss was pushed into the seat across from him. "I trust you've had time to think." Voss met his gaze. "I have." The minister gestured. "Then tell me, will you join me?" Voss exhaled, running his tongue across his teeth. He couldn't say no. Not yet. But he couldn't say yes either. So he did what he did best. He played the game. "I have questions." The minister raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" Voss nodded. "If I work for you, I want to know the full extent of your business." The minister chuckled. "That's not how this works." Voss smirked. "Then it's not going to work at all." The minister studied him. Then, to Voss's surprise, he leaned forward. "Very well." Voss tilted his head. "I will show you," the minister said. Then he smiled. "And when you see what I have built, you will beg to be a part of it." Voss forced himself to keep his expression neutral. This was his chance. The minister thought he was converting a soldier. But Voss was hunting a king. A kingdom of shadows. The next day, Voss was brought out of his prison. 2 guards led him through the compound. Past steel doors. Security checkpoints. Hidden corridors. Until they arrived underground. The air was thick, humid. The passageway stretched deep into the earth, walls lined with reinforced concrete. Voss counted 14 armed men. This wasn't just an office. This was a fortress. The minister walked beside him, speaking as they moved. "You see, Willem, men like us don't survive by playing by the rules." They turned a corner, stepping into a massive underground chamber. Voss's breath slowed. Weapons. Rows upon rows of high-grade military hardware. Rifles. Explosives. Anti-air missiles. Stacks of ammunition. The minister stepped forward, arms spread wide. "This is power." Voss clenched his fists. This was war. The minister turned to him. "You understand now, don't you?" Voss nodded slowly. Yes. He understood everything. The minister wasn't just running a crime syndicate. He was building an army. And if Voss didn't stop him, no one would. The heist begins. That night, back in his room, Voss finally had his plan. He needed 3 things. 1, a way out. 2, weapons. 3, chaos. And he knew exactly where to start. He tapped on the air vent. 3 times. A long pause. Then 3 taps back. Voss grinned. The rookie guard had taken the bait. It was time to burn the minister's empire to the ground. The compound was a monster of concrete and steel, its underground corridors snaking through the earth like veins of a giant beast. Armed guards patrolled the halls, their fingers always near the triggers of their rifles. Security cameras watched everything. Escape was nearly impossible, but Voss had never believed in impossible. He sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the air vent. The rookie guard, his weak link, had responded to his signal. That meant there was doubt in his mind, and doubt was all Voss needed. A midnight visitor. The hours crawled by. Then, at exactly 2:47 a.m., the door lock clicked. Voss didn't move. He kept his breathing steady, his muscles loose. The door opened slowly, and a shadow slipped inside. The rookie. Voss smirked in the darkness. The young guard hesitated before whispering. "You were right." Voss stood up, moving closer. "About what?" The rookie swallowed hard. "About the minister. About how he doesn't care about us." His voice was tight, his hands shaking slightly. "I heard them talking. The minister is just using us. The moment we're no longer useful, we're dead." Voss nodded. "So what do you want?" The rookie's jaw clenched. "Out." Voss placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Then listen carefully." And he told him the plan. The first cut. Voss couldn't break out alone. Not with the level of security in the compound. He needed distraction. Something so chaotic that it would make the guards look away just long enough. The answer was fire. The weapons vault had to burn. It was risky. It meant he wouldn't have access to most of the guns inside, but it also meant that neither would the minister. It was the only way to ensure the compound collapsed from within. But to get to the vault, he needed an access card, which meant someone had to die. A knife in the dark. The next night, the rookie returned. This time, he wasn't alone. Voss stared at the second figure standing in the dim light. He was older, taller, and his uniform was dirty with sweat. "This is Cat Lego," the rookie whispered. "He wants in." Voss studied the man. "Why?" Cat Lego exhaled sharply. "Been working for the minister for 5 years. Thought I was getting rich. Thought I was safe." He shook his head. "Then I saw what he did to Mfalio." Voss frowned. "What happened?" Cat Lego's voice dropped. Mfalio wanted out. The minister found out. He didn't need to finish. Voss sighed. "Do you have access to the weapons vault?" Cat Lego nodded. "Yeah, but if I use my card, they'll know it's me." Voss thought for a moment. "Then we make sure they think someone else did it." He reached under his cot and pulled out the knife he had stolen from a guard's belt earlier that night. Cat Lego's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Voss's smirk was razor sharp. The minister's right-hand man. A corpse with a key. His name was Joseph Neanda, the minister's second in command. Loyal, ruthless, always armed, and Voss had one night to take him down. Neanda's quarters were heavily guarded, but Voss didn't need to get to his room. He just needed to get to him, and that meant baiting the lion out of his cage. Voss orchestrated a fight. That evening, in the mess hall, he started an argument with one of the guards. He threw a tray, flipped a table, made sure everyone saw the chaos. Within minutes, alarms blared, and then, exactly as planned, Neanda arrived. Dressed in his black tactical uniform, his gold watch glinting in the light, he stepped into the mess hall, surrounded by 2 armed guards. Voss had seconds to act. He lunged. One guard swung a rifle toward him. Voss ducked, spinning low, his fist slamming into the man's knee. The guard crumpled with a scream. The second guard raised his weapon, but Cat Lego was already moving. A gunshot rang out. Neanda turned, reaching for his own pistol, and Voss slit his throat. Blood sprayed across the floor as Neanda's body collapsed. His eyes were wide, his hands clutching at the deep, red gash. Voss crouched, searching his pockets, and then he found it. The access card. Cat Lego grabbed Voss's arm. "We have to go. Now." Voss stood, stepping over Neanda's corpse. He smiled. One step closer. The fire that would end it all. Cat Lego swiped the card at the vault door. A small red light blinked. Then, beep. The door unlocked. Voss and the others rushed inside, surrounded by millions of dollars in weapons. Rifles. Explosives. Rockets. Cat Lego exhaled. "We could arm a small army with this." Voss grabbed a grenade. "We aren't here to take them." Cat Lego frowned. "Then what?" Voss pulled the pin and tossed it. Boom. The explosion ripped through the vault, igniting the stacks of ammunition. Flames erupted, swallowing the walls. The heat surged as more ammunition detonated, sending shockwaves through the compound. The alarm screamed. Guards ran in different directions, shouting orders, unsure of where the attack was coming from. Smoke filled the halls, and in the chaos, Voss ran. The devil falls. The minister was nowhere to be seen. His empire was burning. Voss and his men moved fast, taking down guards as they pushed toward the exit tunnels. Cat Lego led the way, his knowledge of the compound proving invaluable. But as they turned the final corridor, a group of men stood in their path. At the center, the minister. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with fury. "You disappoint me, Willem." Voss smirked. "You should have seen it coming." The minister exhaled. "I did." Then he raised his hand. Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the hallway. Voss dived behind a crate, returning fire. Cat Lego shouted orders, taking down 2 of the minister's men. The rookie screamed, then fell, blood pooling beneath him. Voss cursed. No time for grief. The minister was retreating. Voss grabbed a rifle, his boots pounding against the floor as he gave chase. Through the smoke, through the fire, through the ruins of a dying kingdom. And when he finally saw the minister's shadow slip into the helipad, Voss knew. This wasn't over yet. The minister's footsteps echoed across the helipad, his silhouette outlined against the orange glow of the burning compound below. The blades of a black helicopter were already spinning, sending gusts of wind whipping through the air. Voss sprinted up the steel steps, gripping his rifle tight. The heat from the flames below made the metal railings searing hot against his palm. Behind him, Cat Lego struggled to keep up, blood soaking his sleeve from a gunshot wound to his arm. They had one shot at stopping the minister. And that shot was now. A fight against time. The minister turned at the top of the stairs, his coat flaring behind him. He wasn't running anymore. He was waiting. The guards flanking him raised their rifles. Voss dove. Bullets ripped through the air as he rolled behind a stack of fuel drums. The sharp tang of gasoline burned his nostrils. He peeked out just in time to see Cat Lego returning fire, his injured arm trembling from the effort. The minister remained still, watching. A king surveying the last battle for his empire. Voss's mind raced. The helicopter was still warming up. The blades hadn't reached full speed. If he could delay the minister just a little longer, he could end this. A shot in the dark. Cat Lego cursed. His magazine clicked empty. "Cover me," Voss shouted. He leapt from behind cover, firing short, controlled bursts. One of the minister's guards crumpled as bullets tore through his chest. The second guard swung his rifle toward Voss. But Cat Lego tackled him, sending both men crashing into the side of the helicopter. Voss didn't hesitate. He dashed forward, closing the distance between him and the minister. The older man watched him approach. Then finally, he smiled. The final gambit. The minister reached into his coat. Voss expected a gun, a knife, something. But instead, the minister pulled out a detonator. Voss froze. A red light blinked on the device. "This is where it ends, Willem," the minister said, his voice calm, steady. The wind from the helicopter blades whipped through his silver hair. "For both of us." Voss's grip tightened on his rifle. "You're bluffing." The minister chuckled. "Am I?" He gestured toward the burning compound below. Voss followed his gaze, and his blood ran cold. Through the smoke and flames, rows of explosives were strapped to the support beams of the underground facility. C4, military grade. If they detonated, the entire compound, and everything in a 5-block radius, would be erased. Voss clenched his jaw. "You'd kill yourself just to keep your empire from falling?" The minister's eyes gleamed. "My empire is already falling." He took a step back toward the helicopter. Voss lunged. His fingers wrapped around the detonator. Bang! A gunshot rang out. Voss staggered backward, pain erupting in his side. He gritted his teeth. The minister had shot him. The breaking point. Voss dropped to one knee, blood seeping through his shirt. The minister loomed over him, the gun still smoking in his hand. "You were a worthy opponent," the minister admitted. "But this is where your story ends." He raised the pistol. Bang! A second gunshot. But this time, it wasn't from the minister's gun. His chest jerked backward. His coat darkened with blood. His eyes widened in disbelief. He turned slightly, looking behind him. Cat Lego stood there, gun raised, hand steady. "Not today," Cat Lego growled. The minister staggered, his knees buckling. The detonator slipped from his fingers. Voss lunged forward, catching it just before it hit the ground. For a split second, the entire world held its breath. Then, Voss pressed the kill switch. The blinking red light on the detonator died. The bombs would not explode. The minister collapsed onto his back, coughing, blood bubbling at his lips. His hand reached weakly toward the sky. Then, with one final breath, he was gone. The fall of a kingdom. The compound burned. The minister's men either fled or died in the chaos. Voss sat on the helipad, one hand pressed against his gunshot wound, the other still gripping the detonator. Cat Lego dropped beside him, panting. "You alive?" Voss exhaled. "Barely." Cat Lego chuckled, though it was laced with exhaustion. "Good enough." Below them, the minister's empire of crime was nothing more than ashes. A reign of blood, deceit, and power. Ended. And Voss? He had survived. For now. The sun had barely begun to rise over the smoldering remains of the compound. The air was thick with the scent of burnt metal, gunpowder, and blood. Helicopter blades no longer hummed, and the once mighty empire of the minister lay in ruins. Voss sat on the cold concrete of the helipad, his hand still pressed against his bleeding side. The pain was sharp, but his adrenaline kept him steady. Beside him, Cat Lego lay on his back, breathing heavily, staring at the sky as if he still couldn't believe they had survived. Then came the silence. It was the kind of silence that came after a war had been won, but before the next battle could begin. Voss knew the minister was dead, but he also knew that didn't mean he was safe. No rest for the wicked. Cat Lego groaned as he forced himself up onto his elbows. His face was slick with sweat, and his injured arm trembled. "We need to move." Voss exhaled sharply. "Where?" Cat Lego gestured toward the wreckage below. The minister's men are either dead or running, but you know how this works. Voss nodded. He did. When a dictator falls, chaos follows. The minister's rivals would come. His survivors would seek revenge. The vacuum left behind by his death wouldn't remain empty for long. If Voss and Cat Lego didn't disappear now, they would be hunted. And Voss had no intention of dying for a dead king. A city of shadows. They made their way down from the helipad, slipping through the shattered ruins of the minister's domain. Fires still burned in the lower levels, and bodies littered the hallways, both of guards and prisoners who had tried to escape in the chaos. They moved fast. Voss kept his injured side covered, using Cat Lego as a crutch when the pain became unbearable. It took them 40 minutes to reach the edge of the compound. The jungle stretched before them, dark and endless. Beyond it, Johannesburg, a city where criminals didn't disappear, they blended in. Cat Lego looked at Voss. You ready for this? Voss chuckled weakly. We survived hell. What's one more city? Cat Lego smirked. That's what I like to hear. Then they vanished into the trees. Hunted men. Johannesburg was alive by the time they arrived. The city's streets were packed. Cars honked, vendors shouted. People moved like waves through the narrow alleys. Here, in the chaos of the city, two bloodied men could slip through unnoticed. At least, that was the hope. They needed money. They needed a place to hide. And they needed it fast. Cat Lego had contacts, but Voss wasn't sure how many of them were still loyal. After all, working for the minister had been profitable. Now that he was dead, his old allies might see Voss and Cat Lego as nothing more than dead weight. Or worse, loose ends to be tied up. Cat Lego gestured toward a dimly lit bar tucked into a side street. Trust me, he said. I know a guy. Voss sighed. That's what I'm afraid of. But they had no choice. They stepped inside. An old debt. The bar smelled of cheap beer, sweat, and desperation. The kind of place where criminals talked business, deals were made in whispers, and a wrong move could get you stabbed before your drink arrived. At the back of the room, a man sat alone at a table, nursing a glass of whiskey. He was older, with graying hair and a scar running down his cheek. His eyes flickered up as Cat Lego approached. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he exhaled. Cat Lego, he muttered. Didn't think I'd see your face again. Cat Lego smirked. Neither did I, Jonas. Jonas studied him. Then he turned to Voss. And who's this? Voss pulled out a chair and sat down. Someone who needs a new name, a new passport, and a way out of this city. Jonas chuckled. That's a tall order, my friend. Voss leaned forward. Not if you know who I just killed. Jonas paused. His fingers tightened slightly around his glass. Then he nodded slowly. You killed the minister. It wasn't a question. Voss simply smirked. Jonas exhaled again, rubbing his temples. Shit. Cat Lego grinned. So, you gonna help us? Jonas was silent for a moment. Then he drained his whiskey. Depends. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Do you have any idea what's coming for you now? Voss didn't blink. He knew, and he was ready. The bar felt smaller than it should have. Dimly lit, crowded with whispers and smoke, it was a place where men like Jonas thrived, dealmakers, smugglers, and ghosts of the underworld. Places like these weren't safe. Not for men like Voss. He and Cat Lego sat across from Jonas, who still held his empty whiskey glass, rolling it between his fingers. His silence wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. You killed the minister, Jonas finally said, his voice low, steady. That means every crime lord, corrupt official, and cartel boss in this country is watching the streets right now, waiting to see who steps into his shoes. Voss leaned back, adjusting his grip on his wounded side. The pain was there gnawing, but he ignored it. I'm not looking to take his place. Jonas chuckled. Doesn't matter. You put a bullet in the most powerful man in this city. That makes you a problem. Cat Lego folded his arms. So, you gonna help us or not? Jonas exhaled through his nose. I can get you new papers, maybe even a way out of the country. But it won't come cheap. Voss narrowed his eyes. How much? Jonas smiled, slow and deliberate. I don't want your money. A favor in the dark. Voss and Cat Lego exchanged a glance. Deals without money were dangerous. Jonas leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. There's a shipment coming into the harbor tonight. High-value cargo. Someone stole it from a warlord up north. I need it off the streets before the wrong hands get to it. Voss frowned. You want us to steal from a warlord? Jonas shrugged. It was already stolen. I just want it relocated. Voss's instincts screamed trap. Cat Lego was the first to speak. If we do this, you get us what we need. Jonas's grin widened. New identities. New passports. Safe passage out of South Africa. He spread his hands. That is, if you're still breathing by morning. Voss exhaled. He knew the game. There was no other option. Where's the shipment? He asked. Jonas leaned back, satisfied. Durban. Tonight. Pier 16. Durban, a city on fire. The drive to Durban was 5 hours of tension. They stole an old black Toyota Hilux from a gas station parking lot, knowing damn well they'd have to ditch it later. Voss sat in the passenger seat, fingers tapping against his thigh. The highway stretched ahead, empty and dark. Cat Lego, behind the wheel, broke the silence. You trust Jonas? No. Cat Lego smirked. Good. They both knew this wasn't just about some stolen shipment. If Jonas was involved, then bigger players were pulling the strings. The real question was, who? By the time they reached Durban's docks, the city was alive with neon and crime. The air was thick with salt and gasoline. The harbor a graveyard of rusted shipping containers and forgotten cargo. They parked outside Pier 16, watching from the shadows. Voss spotted them first. 5 men, dressed in dark clothing, standing around a single container. Armed. Professional. They weren't dock workers. This is too clean, Voss muttered. This isn't just a stolen shipment. Cat Lego nodded. So what now? Voss exhaled. We steal it anyway. The heist at Pier 16. They moved like ghosts, weaving between the containers, their boots silent against the wet concrete. Voss counted the guards. 5 outside. At least 2 more inside the container. Cat Lego pulled his pistol. How you want to do this? Voss considered. Quiet if we can. Loud if we have to. Cat Lego smirked. It's always loud. Voss moved first. He slipped behind the nearest guard, wrapping his arm around the man's throat, pulling him into the shadows. The struggle was brief, a choke, a gasp, then silence. Cat Lego moved next. A suppressed shot. A body slumped against a crate. One by one they fell, until only one guard remained. The man turned, too late. Voss's knife sank into his side, and he crumpled to the ground. Then, a sound, a voice, coming from inside the container. Voss and Cat Lego exchanged a look. Then they moved. What was inside? Voss yanked the container doors open, and froze. Inside wasn't money. Inside wasn't drugs. Inside was a woman, bound, gagged, eyes wide with terror. Cat Lego cursed under his breath. Shit! Voss turned. He suddenly understood. The stolen shipment wasn't cargo. It was human trafficking. And the people they just killed, they weren't criminals. They were trying to save her. The price of freedom. Voss, Cat Lego's voice was tight, urgent. We just stole a human being. Voss's mind raced. Jonas knew. He had set them up. He wanted them to take the fall for this. And now they were in deep. Voss knelt in front of the woman, gently removing the gag. We're not here to hurt you. Her voice was hoarse. Please help me. Cat Lego's jaw clenched. So what do we do? Voss exhaled. They could walk away. Leave her. Take their papers and disappear. Or they could burn everything down. He knew his answer. Get her in the truck, Voss said. Cat Lego nodded. They had just declared war. And there was no turning back. The truck rumbled through the outskirts of Durban, its tires humming against the wet asphalt. The woman sat between Voss and Cat Lego, her wrists still raw from the ropes. She hadn't spoken much since they pulled her from that shipping container, but the fear in her eyes told them everything. Cat Lego glanced at Voss. We need a plan. Voss nodded, eyes locked on the road ahead. Yeah, and fast. They had stolen a person. A person Jonas had deliberately sent them to retrieve, knowing damn well what was inside that container. That meant one thing. They weren't just running from one enemy now. They were running from all of them. The girl without a name. Who are you? Voss finally asked. The woman hesitated. She pulled the thin blanket around her shoulders, still shivering despite the warm night air. My name is Nia. Voss nodded. Where were they taking you? She swallowed hard. I don't know exactly, but I heard them talking about Mozambique, about buyers waiting on the other side of the border. Cat Lego cursed under his breath. Traffickers. Voss clenched his jaw. He had seen this kind of thing before. Cartels selling people like cargo, corrupt politicians turning a blind eye, powerful men profiting off suffering. And Jonas? Jonas had wanted them to deliver her. That meant someone somewhere had paid for her. And now that she was missing, that someone would come looking. Hard. Who were those men at the docks? Voss asked. The ones guarding the container? Nia's hands trembled. They weren't traffickers. They were trying to save me. Silence filled the truck. Cat Lego let out a slow breath. Jonas set us up. Voss flexed his fingers on the steering wheel. Then we need to set him up first. No safe place. They couldn't go back to Johannesburg. The minister's empire was in chaos, and every crime boss in South Africa would be watching the streets. But Durban wasn't safe either. And Mozambique. That was where the buyers were, which meant their only choice was north, to a place where even criminals hesitated to go. Voss made the decision. We're going to Mpumalanga. Cat Lego frowned. That's on the border of Kruger. What the hell are we going to do in the middle of a game reserve? Voss smirked. Disappear. Cat Lego exhaled. Shit. Fine. But first, we need guns, cash, and a new car. Voss agreed. They had no choice. They needed to hit the underworld before the underworld hit them. And that meant one place. The pit. The pit, where criminals trade. The pit wasn't a club. It wasn't a bar. It was a market hidden beneath the slums of Durban, where criminals bought and sold everything: drugs, weapons, fake passports, information, even lives. Voss had been there once before, years ago. It was the kind of place where you walked in knowing you might not walk out. Voss parked a few blocks away. Cat Lego turned to Nia. Stay here. Keep your head down. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She just pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and nodded. Then Voss and Cat Lego stepped into the underworld. The price of survival. The pit was exactly as Voss remembered, dark, filthy, and full of the worst kind of people. Men with scarred faces whispered in corners. Dealers exchanged bags of powder and cash with a handshake. A woman with a rifle slung across her back sat on a crate, counting stacks of dirty bills. Voss and Cat Lego moved fast. They found a seller, an old arms dealer named Baxter, whose face was covered in burns from an explosion years ago. Baxter grinned when he saw them. Well, well, look what the sewer dragged in. Save it, Voss said. We need guns, something quiet, and a new car. Baxter's grin widened. Quiet guns and stolen cars? That tells me one thing. You boys are running. Cat Lego sighed. Just show us what you got. Baxter chuckled, pulling back a tarp to reveal an arsenal. Suppressed pistols, rifles, shotguns, knives. Voss picked up a Glock 19, checking the slide. How much? Baxter leaned against the table. Depends. Who's after you? Voss locked eyes with him. The whole damn country. Baxter let out a long whistle. Well, that's gonna cost extra. The setup. They left the pit with 2 pistols, a short-barrel rifle, a bag of ammunition, and a new car, a battered old Land Rover Defender that smelled like sweat and cigarettes. As they loaded up, Voss turned to Cat Lego. We can't just run, he said. Jonas needs to know we're coming for him. Cat Lego smirked. I was hoping you'd say that. Voss pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Jonas answered on the first ring. I see you're still alive. Voss grinned. Not for long, if you have your way. Jonas chuckled. Come on, my friend. You know how this works. Business is business. Voss leaned against the hood of the Land Rover. Business is when you trade in guns or drugs. But selling people? That's something else. Jonas sighed. What do you want? Voss's voice was ice. I want you to know we're not running. We're coming for you. Silence. Then Jonas chuckled. I hope you do, Voss. Because you won't make it far. You just made enemies you don't even know exist. Voss smiled. Then let's meet them. He hung up. Cat Lego exhaled. You just signed our death warrant. Voss climbed into the driver's seat. No, he said. I just started a war. Then he drove into the night. The streets of Johannesburg were restless. Voss could feel it the moment they arrived. The city was alive, but something darker lurked beneath the neon lights, something that had always been there, power shifting hands. The minister was dead, and now every crime boss, syndicate leader, and corrupt official was scrambling to take his place. It was a dangerous time to be here, especially for men like Voss and Cat Lego, especially now that they had made an enemy out of Jonas. The Land Rover rumbled to a stop outside an abandoned warehouse near Newtown, the kind of place where bodies were dumped when deals went wrong. Inside, a man was waiting for them. Isaac Tim. He was an information broker, a man who traded secrets like currency. If anyone knew where Jonas was hiding, it was him. But finding Jonas was only half the problem. Surviving what came next was the other half. A meeting in the dark, The warehouse smelled of oil and decay. Isaac sat on an overturned crate, flipping a switchblade open and closed. His expression was unreadable, his eyes scanning Voss and Cat Lego like a man calculating odds. "You boys are stupid," he said finally. Voss exhaled. "Good to see you too, Isaac." Isaac smirked. "Word on the street is you pissed off Jonas. Now every gangster in this city is either looking for you or placing bets on how long you'll last." Cat Lego crossed his arms. "Yeah, and what's the current bet?" Isaac flicked the blade shut. 3 days. Voss leaned forward. "Then let's make sure they all lose." Isaac chuckled. "You always were ambitious." Voss didn't smile. "We need Jonas. Now." Isaac studied them, then sighed. "Jonas is careful. He moves constantly. He has safe houses across the city, but there's one place he always returns to, the Ivory Club." Cat Lego raised an eyebrow. "That fancy place in Santon?" Isaac nodded. "It's not just a club. It's where the real power in this city meets. The men in suits, the politicians, the gang lords. Jonas owns it, and if you go there, you better be ready to go to war." Voss and Cat Lego exchanged a glance. Then Voss turned back to Isaac. "Then give us the address." The Ivory Club. At night, Santon looked like another world. Glass skyscrapers, expensive cars, a skyline glowing with money and power. It was the kind of place where men like Jonas hid in plain sight, untouchable, protected by police, politicians, and mercenaries who would kill for a paycheck. The Ivory Club sat at the heart of it all. A high-end nightclub, yes. But more than that, it was a fortress. Guards stood outside, dressed in black suits, earpieces in their ears, weapons concealed but ready. The entrance was a statement. This wasn't just a place for criminals. This was a place for kings. Voss and Cat Lego parked 3 blocks away. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Cat Lego asked. Voss nodded. "We're not walking in the front door. Breaking in." They moved through the back alleys, slipping past dumpsters and fire escapes, avoiding the eyes of doormen and security cameras. Voss had been in places like this before. Not as a guest, as a ghost. They reached a side entrance, a locked service door. Voss pulled a silenced pistol from his jacket, then nodded at Cat Lego. Cat Lego took out a small device, a homemade signal jammer. He activated it, blocking radio communication for a 50-meter radius. The guards inside wouldn't be able to call for help. Voss picked the lock. The door clicked open. They stepped inside, and the hunt began. The inner sanctum. The Ivory Club was bigger than it looked from the outside. The lower levels were filled with music, flashing lights, and people drinking cocktails worth more than most people made in a month. Voss and Cat Lego ignored them. They moved upstairs, past velvet curtains and private lounges, deeper into the shadows where the real business happened. Then, they saw him. Jonas. He was sitting in a private room, sipping whiskey, surrounded by 4 bodyguards and a woman in a red dress who looked more dangerous than all of them. Cat Lego exhaled. "So what's the play?" Voss smirked. "We crashed the party. The ambush." They moved fast. Voss took out the first guard silently, a knife between the ribs before the man even had a chance to react. Cat Lego took out the second with a single suppressed shot. Then the alarms went off. Jonas jumped to his feet, whiskey glass shattering on the table. The woman in the red dress pulled a gun, but she wasn't fast enough. Voss was already moving. A gunshot split the air. The woman stumbled back, blood spreading across her dress. Jonas tried to run, but Cat Lego tackled him to the ground. The last 2 bodyguards pulled their weapons, too slow. Voss fired twice. Bodies hit the floor. Jonas struggled under Cat Lego's grip, eyes wide with fury. "You idiots just signed your death warrants." Voss knelt beside him, pressing his gun to Jonas's forehead. "No," he said. "We're just getting started. A new enemy." Jonas chuckled, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You think this ends with me?" he whispered. "You think I was the one pulling the strings?" Voss's finger twitched on the trigger. "Explain." Jonas grinned. "You stole Nia from me, but she was never mine to sell." Cat Lego frowned. "Then whose was she?" Jonas smirked. "The Marble Syndicate," he said. "And if you think I was bad, you haven't met them yet." Voss felt ice crawl down his spine. The Marble Syndicate. A name whispered in the dark, an organization older than South Africa itself, built on blood, politics, and power that stretched beyond borders. Jonas coughed. "Killing me won't save you." Voss exchanged a glance with Cat Lego. Then, he pulled the trigger. The road ahead. They left Jonas's body in that room, alarms still blaring. They escaped through the chaos, disappearing into the city before the police, or worse, could arrive. But they knew the truth now. Jonas had been just a pawn. The real enemy was out there, watching, waiting. And Voss and Cat Lego? They had just declared war on something far more dangerous than a crime lord. The Marble Syndicate was coming, and there was no turning back. The streets of Johannesburg stretched out before them, neon lights flickering like dying stars against the dark skyline. Voss and Cat Lego drove in silence, the Land Rover weaving through the late-night traffic, their minds heavy with the weight of what they had just done. Jonas was dead, but instead of feeling like a victory, it felt like a mistake. Because now, they weren't just running from corrupt cops, rival gangs, or mercenaries looking for a paycheck. They were running from the Marble Syndicate, a ghost in the underworld, a shadow over South Africa. And if Jonas had feared them, then they were worse than anything Voss and Cat Lego had ever faced before. The warning. They pulled into a safe house on the edge of Hillbrow, a rundown apartment overlooking a city that never truly slept. Mia was waiting for them inside, pacing the floor, her face tight with anxiety. The moment she saw them, she rushed forward. "Tell me you didn't kill him." Voss tossed his blood-stained jacket onto the table. "We had no choice." Mia clenched her fists. "You don't understand what you've done." Cat Lego scoffed. "Oh, we understand just fine. We cut the head off the snake." Mia shook her head. "No, you cut the leash." Voss narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Jonas wasn't just working for the Marble Syndicate, he was their errand boy. He was nothing, a disposable middleman. Voss and Cat Lego exchanged a glance. "So who's above him?" Cat Lego asked. Mia hesitated. Then she said a name. "Malcolm Gray." The room went silent. Voss exhaled. "That's impossible. Gray disappeared years ago." Cat Lego's jaw tightened. "They said he was dead." Mia shook her head. "That's what they wanted everyone to believe." "Who is Malcolm Gray?" 15 years ago, Malcolm Gray was a legend, a ruthless mastermind who ran smuggling routes from Cape Town to Lagos, dealing in diamonds, weapons, and blood. He built an empire in the shadows, but then one day he vanished. Some said he was arrested and executed in secret. Others believed he had been killed by his own people. But if he was alive, if he was the real power behind the Marble Syndicate, then Voss and Cat Lego weren't fighting a war they could win. They were already dead men walking. A message from the grave. A sudden buzzing cut through the silence. Voss's phone vibrated on the table. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A voice, low and calm, spoke on the other end. "You should have let Jonas live." Voss's grip tightened. "Who is this?" A soft chuckle. "You already know." Voss felt ice creep up his spine. "Malcolm Gray." "Tell me, Voss," Gray continued, his voice smooth and unhurried. "Did you really think killing Jonas would change anything? Did you think it would stop us?" Voss kept his voice steady. "I think it sent a message." Gray hummed. "Oh, it did. And now, I'm going to send one back." A second later, a gunshot exploded through the apartment. The window shattered. Voss barely had time to react before Cat Lego tackled Mia to the ground, shielding her as a second round punched through the wall. "Sniper!" Cat Lego shouted. Voss dug behind the couch, heart pounding. "Where?" Cat Lego peered out the broken window. "Top of the building across the street, 3rd floor." Voss cursed under his breath. "They found us fast." Another shot rang out, splintering the wooden table. Gray's voice still whispered through the phone. "You have one night, Voss. One night to disappear, or I'll make sure there's nothing left of you to find." Then the line went dead. Nowhere to hide. "We have to move," Voss shouted, grabbing his pistol. Cat Lego pulled Mia up. "Where?" Voss thought fast. Hillbrow was a death trap. Too many narrow streets, too many places to get cornered. They needed somewhere unpredictable. Somewhere even the Marble Syndicate wouldn't expect them to go. Then it hit him. The mines. Cat Lego frowned. "The hell are you talking about?" Voss grabbed the keys. "The old mines outside Carltonville. Deep tunnels, abandoned shafts, no cameras, no eyes. If we disappear there, even Gray's men won't find us." Cat Lego hesitated. Then another bullet tore through the door, missing him by inches. "Fine," he growled. "Let's go." Into the dark. The Land Rover roared through the streets, tires screeching as they raced against death itself. Behind them, headlights appeared, black SUVs moving fast, weaving through traffic. "They sent a team," Mia shouted. Voss gritted his teeth. "Then let's see if they can keep up." He slammed the gas pedal. The chase was on. The Marble Syndicate wasn't just hunting them anymore. They were coming to end them. And if Voss, Cat Lego, and Nia didn't reach the mines in time, they'd be buried long before they ever got there. The Land Rover roared down the highway, headlights slicing through the darkness as Voss, Cat Lego, and Nia sped toward the abandoned mines near Carltonville. Behind them, a convoy of black SUVs followed like wolves on the hunt. How many? Cat Lego asked, gripping his gun. Voss checked the mirror. At least 3, maybe 4. Nia exhaled sharply. Gray doesn't play games. Voss smirked. Neither do we. Then the bullets started flying. A burst of gunfire shredded the back windshield. Voss swerved hard, dodging another volley of lead, sending the Land Rover fishtailing across the asphalt. Cat Lego cursed. We need to lose them. But up ahead, the road stretched empty and open. No turns, no cover, nowhere to hide. And the Marble Syndicate's men were closing in. Fast. Into the abyss. Then Voss saw it. A rusted sign by the side of the road, barely visible in the dark. Danger, abandoned mines. No entry. Perfect. Hold on. Voss shouted. He jerked the wheel hard to the right, sending the Land Rover skidding off the road and onto a narrow dirt path leading toward the abandoned mining complex. The SUVs followed, tires kicking up a cloud of dust. Nia clutched her seatbelt. Voss, are you insane? Voss grinned. Little bit. The road grew rougher, twisting through the hills, past crumbling shacks and rusted machinery. Ahead, the entrance to an old mining tunnel loomed in the darkness, a black hole carved into the earth. The convoy behind them wasn't slowing down. Cat Lego nodded. We go in. Voss hit the gas. The Land Rover plunged into the tunnel, swallowed by darkness. The trap. Inside, the air turned thick with dust. The Land Rover's headlights barely cut through the gloom, revealing rusted tracks and wooden beams that looked ready to collapse. Then, the sound of engines behind them. The SUVs followed them in, their headlights burning like hungry eyes. Voss gritted his teeth. They're not giving up. Cat Lego grabbed his shotgun. Then we make them. Voss slammed the brakes. The Land Rover skidded to a stop, tires screeching. The SUVs tried to react, but it was too late. Cat Lego threw open the door, raised his shotgun, and fired. Boom. The first SUV's windshield exploded. The driver lost control, crashing into a support beam. A thunderous crack echoing through the tunnel as rocks and dirt rained down. The second SUV swerved, barely dodging the wreckage. Voss grabbed a backpack from the back seat, explosives stolen from an old weapons stash. Nia's eyes widened. Oh hell no. Voss grinned. Oh hell yes. He lit the detonator and tossed it. Run. They sprinted deeper into the tunnel. Behind them, boom. The tunnel collapsed, burying the SUVs under tons of rock. Silence. Dust. Then, Cat Lego exhaled. Well, that was dramatic. Nia punched Voss's arm. You could have warned me first. Voss just laughed, shaking the dust from his hair. Where's the fun in that? The ghosts below. The tunnel stretched deeper into the earth, winding through the abandoned gold mines that had once made men rich, before they had been left to rot. Voss pulled out a flashlight. We keep moving. They walked in silence, their footsteps echoing off the damp walls. Something about this place felt wrong, like they weren't alone. Then Nia stopped. Did you hear that? She whispered. Voss and Cat Lego froze. A shuffling noise echoed from somewhere ahead, then a low whisper. A chill ran down Voss's spine. We're not alone. Cat Lego raised his gun. Who else would be down here? A light flickered in the distance. A lantern. Then a voice. You shouldn't be here. From the shadows, a figure emerged. A man wrapped in rags, his skin covered in dust and scars, eyes sunken and hollow. A survivor. Or maybe, a ghost of the mines. The forgotten ones. The man stepped closer, his breath ragged. You don't belong here, he rasped. Voss tightened his grip on his pistol. Neither do you. The man just smiled. That's where you're wrong. More figures appeared behind him. At least a dozen men. Thin, hollow, wounded, but all of them armed. Voss realized the truth. These weren't just men. They were the forgotten ones, miners abandoned when the companies left, forced to survive underground, turning into something else entirely. And now Voss, Cat Lego, and Nia were trespassing in their home. Cat Lego exhaled. Well, this is awkward. Nia whispered. Voss, what's the play here? The lead miner stepped forward, his knife glinting in the dim light. You have two choices, he said. You stay down here forever, or you die right now. Voss met his gaze. Then he smiled. You forgot the third choice. The man frowned. What third choice? Voss took a step forward, unafraid. We make a deal. A dangerous alliance. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then finally, the man lowered his knife. I'm listening. Voss grinned. You want revenge? The man's eyes darkened. More than anything. Voss nodded. Then help us take down the Marble Syndicate. A beat. Then the man smiled. And hell itself was about to rise from the mines.